The subjective theory of value, Mises' intellectual evasion. Ludwig von Mises is often praised as a master of economic reasoning, a defender of free markets, and a pioneer of so-called value-free economics. But his theory of value was not value-free. It was not scientific. It was not even explanatory. Mises constructed an ideological shelter, not a theory, a framework designed not to understand value, but to protect a preordained worldview from challenge. At the center of that shelter is the subjective theory of value, or STV. This theory says that value is purely personal, purely mental, defined entirely by individual preference. If someone desires something, then it is valuable. If someone acts purposefully, then the action is rational. And if two people trade voluntarily, then the result is good, by definition. This system eliminates any external evaluation. There is no room for strategic failure. No room for systemic inefficiency. No room for performance-based feedback. It is a closed loop. A self-validating dogma. And crucially, it is not a defense of capitalism in any rigorous or evolutionary sense. What Mises really defends is anarcho-capitalism, a system that fuses Lockean property theory, voluntarism, and market exchange, but removes any concept of long-run accountability. Anarcho-capitalism does not say the original homesteader must own something forever. Rather, it says the original act of appropriation establishes rightful ownership, and from that point forward, the owner decides how to use, transfer, or contract property. But the problem is deeper than just the transfer mechanism. The problem is that anarcho-capitalism assumes that as long as ownership and exchange are voluntary, the outcome is morally and economically valid, regardless of external consequences. Productive potential, or systemic impact. Mises reinforced this by redefining value as subjective and ordinal, and rationality as intentional action. In doing so, he built a theory that cannot recognize bad strategy, cannot optimize, and cannot adapt, because there's no standard of value beyond what any individual happens to want at a given moment. This is not science. This is preemptive moral immunity for individual control. Now here's where things get uncomfortable, especially for libertarians. Mises used the exact same method as Karl Marx. Marx started with a moral conclusion that capitalism exploits labor. Then he built the labor theory of value to make that conclusion logically inevitable. If labor creates all value, then profit must be theft. Now watch what Mises does. He starts with a different moral conclusion, that all voluntary trade is good. Then he builds the subjective theory of value to guarantee that conclusion. If all value is subjective, then any trade between consenting individuals must be justified. Different ideology, same method. They both redefine value so that their conclusion is always correct. They both eliminate the possibility of systemic critique. There is one more distinction worth making. Mises did not believe in natural rights. Rothbard did. Rothbard built anarcho-capitalism on a moral foundation, self-ownership, non-aggression, and Lockean property rights, which he considered axiomatic. Mises rejected all of that. He didn't believe individuals had rights in any metaphysical sense. Instead, he argued that private property and free exchange were necessary because they produced better results, not because they were morally justified. But here's the irony. Even though Mises rejected moral axioms, he still constructed a theory that functionally protects individual preference from any moral or systemic scrutiny. He wanted a purely utilitarian framework, yet he redefined rationality in a way that makes outcomes irrelevant. He claimed to oppose natural rights, but then built a system where voluntary control over property is treated as sacrosanct. He didn't believe in natural rights, but he acted like preferences were untouchable. This is not value neutrality. This is ideological camouflage. Mises' STV doesn't model how systems evolve, how strategies fail, or how value is optimized. It makes economics blind to failure, hostile to adaptation, and incapable of improvement. But the real world is not governed by preference. It is governed by evolution. And this is where the relative theory of evolutionary value comes in. RTEV rejects voluntarist dogma. It recognizes that value emerges not from desire, but from strategic fitness in a dynamic environment. Prices are not validated by consent, they are signals of evolutionary payoff. Property is not sacred because someone acquired it, but because it's being used productively. Toward the construction of the perfect evolutionary being, the long-run metric of systemic success. In this framework, capitalism is not defined by ownership or voluntary exchange, but by performance. The market is not sacred. It is a mechanism, a tool, for efficiently allocating decision-making power and capital in ways that maximize evolutionary benefit. And this is exactly the kind of system Mises could not tolerate. Because it makes individual behavior accountable. It makes preference insufficient. And it means that even voluntary systems must evolve or be outcompeted. So Mises built a wall. A soft metaphysical cage where nothing needs to work, it just needs to be chosen. He didn't give us a theory of value. He gave us an escape route from responsibility. And that's why it's time to move past him, not in anger, not even in ridicule, but in clarity. Mises wasn't defending capitalism. He was defending a voluntarist ideology dressed up as logic. If you want real markets, real optimization, and real progress, you need more than consent. You need performance, feedback, and evolution. Because in the real world, value isn't what you want, it's what works.